Well, hello and welcome to Psychological Autopsy. I'm your host, Jeff Daugherty. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Today, we're going to be talking on the subject of why leaving feels impossible. Leaving a control system, it doesn't feel hard because we're weak. It feels impossible at times because there's something much deeper at stake. Because if leaving were simply about being right or wrong, most people would leave immediately. But control systems, they don't hold you with arguments. Control systems hold you with identity. And maybe the first thing we should do is define what a control system is. Control systems can be relationships. They can be intimate relationships. They can even be familial relationships. They can even be relationships with parents or with children. They can be relationships with friend groups, best friends, not so best friends. They can be relationships with organizations that you're involved in. They can be relationships within your work environment. And they can also be relationships within ideological groups, political relationships, and even spiritual or church relationships. And what we're talking about here at Psychological Autopsy is not about any one belief. It's not about any one system. It's not about any one structure. It's not about any one institution. What we're trying to talk about is the psychological structure that goes into all of those things that we've just talked about. And we're talking to smart people. And if we are smart people, then why doesn't logic set us free? Well, it's because leaving isn't blocked by a lack of evidence. It's not blocked by a lack of intelligence, and it's certainly not blocked by a lack of courage. So what does block our leaving? Well, it's a thing that I like to call identity investment. Sometimes you can get so deep within a structure, a relationship, a work environment, a church, a political party, that you can actually begin to ask yourself, who am I without this? You begin to talk to yourself about, I've had so many years invested in her, in him, in them, in this. And also there's that idea of your public alignment. What will people think? And how will it affect other people within my life? Because leaving most often isn't simply about changing your mind. It's actually about rewriting your story. And not to oversimplify it, but there's typically 4 forces that don't make leaving impossible, but they make it feel impossible. Number 1 is the social cost. Because when you leave a system, you're leaving a community. And it's natural to feel a loss. We talked a little bit about it. You can also suffer reputational damage. And what happens to the people within your orbit? What about my family? If it's a family-based relationship, it'll cause strain. If it affects your family, it can cause a strain. And really, your fear, our fear, isn't about being wrong. A lot of times, it's about being alone. And then number 2, leaving can force a meaning collapse. Because there's a reason why we're in systems in the first place. They provide a purpose. Sometimes they provide moral clarity. And at the very least, they provide structure. And when you leave something that you've invested purpose into, moral clarity into, something that's given you structure, at the very least you get at least a temporary emotional free fall. And depending upon how deep it is, and if it's a spiritual, religious type of a structure, it can actually create an existential instability. It can actually go to who you feel you really are. And sometimes when all of these factors become involved, meaning can begin to disappear. Meaning outside of the structure can disappear. And then even stability that's unhealthy can start to feel safer than freedom, which a lot of times is being alone. And then we have number 3, which is shame conditioning. And this tends to be built into structures. It's hardwired because these control systems will often frame your dissent as betrayal. They'll frame questions that you have, simple questions, will be equated with moral failure. And they can equate leaving with corruption. And all these things combine to, over time, create a situation where you begin to censor yourself. You're self-censoring. And your doubts can trigger guilt. The doubts about the structure can trigger guilt. The doubts about the system can trigger guilt. And your doubts about you not seeing or not wanting to leave can trigger guilt. And then guilt becomes shame, and shame becomes the leash that binds you to the control system, the control structure. And then number 4, finally, we have the fear of future regret. Because we get to the place where we will ask ourselves questions like, yeah, but what if I'm wrong? What if I destroy everything? This is called catastrophic thinking. And control systems are built to create and instill catastrophic thinking. And they do it intentionally. It's the end of the world as you know it. That's what they want you to think. Because control systems are very good at exaggerating the cost of leaving and minimizing the cost of staying. And it creates this internal war. It creates this very unsettling emotional experience. You find yourself rehearsing exit conversations many, many times, like an actor in a script. You start to test with small little doubts. And even if it's not conscious, you begin to withdraw quietly. And we know all too well that we feel anxious constantly. And the truth of the matter is, by the time someone finally leaves, they've really already left internally dozens and dozens of times. So what actually breaks the hold? Well, leaving feels impossible not because you're incapable, but because these control systems are so good at attaching themselves to your identity, to your belonging, and sometimes even to your very meaning. And Psychological Autopsy is here. We exist to try to examine these mechanisms and examine them calmly, so we can help equip you to recognize them early. And if you've ever felt trapped between doubt and fear, you are not irrational. You're simply navigating what's called psychological gravity that's being applied on you by outside forces. And sooner or later, what actually breaks the hold, typically, is the accumulation of contradictions. You get the proverbial straw on the camel's back, and it's just one too many, and you've had enough, and you begin to maybe grasp and take advantage of this single flashing moment of clarity. And sometimes it's just the weight of emotional exhaustion that finally brings you to that place. And when these things start to align, then, if you're fortunate, you can actually take advantage of a external validation as well. But most people are not going to leave because someone convinced them to leave. People leave when that internal emotional tension just becomes unsustainable. That's typically what we see. That's typically how it works. If you are hearing something that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And we'll be back to discuss this more. I'm Jeff Daugherty. And until next time, this is Psychological Autopsy. And we'll see you again real soon. And remember, you're really not alone.